Yep.
It was more than saltwater folks talking. Martin Larson was the farmer down there.
Okay. Cool.
Mostly farmers versus bureaucrats like me. Well attended and wonderful, practical question. The university and state government should talk about, how this, how can we use that to deliver the conservation activity.
Use
Good fertilizer management, use cover.
use the CI score mechanism.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just reading Continuum's website on that, and it looks like it's almost entirely targeted at ethanol plants right now. Is that
It is right now.
okay?
We need that. It's literally now.
Okay, got it.
Matt, hello.
Good to see you.
When are you planting my tomatoes?
I should be soon, hopefully, yeah. It's been off my radar, but yeah, I'm glad you reminded me.
Yeah, thanks. In fact, usually it's.
He's my supplier.
February for me.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Have not.
Are you planting tomatoes, Frank?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have yours going yet, or do you go from seed?
Don't have them growing yet, but I just planted cauliflower, cabbage, and broccoli.
Wow, you're ahead of the game.
So you kind of sweat your seed first and moist tomato and pepper? Not really. That's what I used to know, but not now. What?
He's
For
retired.
Christmas. For Christmas. One of my sons and my daughter-in-law gave me that little little gizmo. It's actually two pieces of wood. One's round, cylindrical. The other one's sort of a little table it sits on. You wrap the newspaper around it, and then you scrunch it down on the other piece of it. It makes a little paper pot. That
Oh, lovely.
soil in, put some seeds in, let them germinate, and then you just transplant it. When it's big enough and when it's warm enough outside, transplant it outside. You just have to take anything out of the pot because the newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'd rather just.
so far.
Does that work? I can get on this. What
We'll have to see.
You can plug in, you have to get on Zoom either way.
Yeah.
So you can either share your screen via Zoom, and
That's
the
fine.
computer will send it to the screen, or,
Yeah.
okay.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Can you send me a Zoom link?
Germany.
Or?
Yeah, it
I have-
takes like 2 weeks.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of issues. What we've been having the last couple of years. We live about a.
Register it is.
Yards away from the.
Yeah, it's a register.
farm. And.
Hello.
Hey, John, you,
Hi.
how are you?
We have.
Doing well. How about you?
Good.
Flowers.
Hi, Nick.
Hello.
You got today?
So no-
Yes, unfortunately for all parties.
Well, unfortunately.
When you met up.
And all I could think of
We
is,
decided to go for like kid bedtime.
2 years
It
ago.
was gonna be right after this, but going up to the Berkey.
Yeah, what were you saying?
I'm just staying at Aaron's parents in Bloomer, 2 hours south, and then driving up day up. No reason to
That's all I can think.
stay overnight because my race is at 1:30.
Oh, good luck.
1:30.
Are you doing the big long one?
Yeah,
There is no big one.
this year it's 30K because there's no snow, so it's just a loop,
Oh,
10K loop times 3.
Sure.
And it'll be slushy and weird conditions, but it's a party, so
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
point.
That's why the race day temperatures didn't actually end up being that far off.
Oh, good.
Like, I mean, it's gonna be a huge swing during the day,
Right.
but like when it ends a little above freezing, it's sort of normal.
It is true, that's true, it is normal. but-
Everything else around it,
Yeah, 2 days later, it'll be 50. So to the gardeners in the room, are you planning to establish early, betting on this trend continuing, or are you gonna stick to your typical timing? Or to the farmer in the room, I should say too.
Vegetables, no, oats, maybe.
Yeah.
In fact, there was talk down in Montana, it's like, well, even though you can, don't get out there this week, plant oats.
Yeah. I saw there's a Mark,
There's a dairy farmer in mine.
oh yeah,
Yep.
Yeah.
there was a Mark Seeley article about the last time it was this crazy warm, 100 years ago or something, and some farmers did plant oats in February or other grains and bread.
Easter has kind of been my benchmark.
down there and then it's snow. I've planted oats in snow. Martin Larson down there was saying, you know, kind of light frost seeding oats is, that's his benchmark. Planting in the late frost is sweet spot.
Does he broadcast or just drill the day at that time?
He drilled it.
Yeah,
The forecasted low temperature for Morris for next Wednesday or Thursday is 3 degrees. I want too many things too early.
Yeah. You got-
How are your trees, do you think?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
If we don't get below so last year we had an incredible apricot year. And absolutely wonderful. This year, there's plenty of flower buds, and if we don't get below -20, we should have another good year. And so far, we haven't got below 0.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Is that right? Because we've had some below zero here in the Twin Cities.
Not us.
We had like a one cold, maybe 2 episodes of that.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Have you been to Swan Lake?
I was there yesterday.
How is that look?
Not good. But, you know, I don't know if that's winter injury, because it hasn't been all that cold, but the little bit of cold that we did have, there was no snow. I didn't spend a lot of time.
Sure.
I was really looking at Kearns, I wanted to see if we have some Kearns plot out there. I wanted to see if those are starting to close. And then neighboring next to the Kearns, there's pennycress. And the pennycress looked very good.
Okay.
I was hoping to see rain, but you had to really search for
Mm.
green tissues.
You had a good signal for February.
yeah. I'd rather have that than, ooh, it looks nice and starting to flower.
Yeah, it depends if it's gonna turn green or if it's dead.
Sarah, can you hear us? Is this all coming through?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Good. Wonderfully thought of.
Turn you up a notch or two. Before I forget, Jeff, Frank has done a mini update to our review of the leaching data with oil seeds.
Okay.
Because after the symposium, we heard about a couple other papers and those weren't published yet, but Frank still did more searching and brought in a couple more citations. So I need to get that sent to you. Doesn't change the conclusions, but it's more complete.
But nothing, one tiny error in the copy that I sent to you, and I referred to MN 106, but I said MN 61.
Ah.
Should be
Just down.
Yeah. Yeah,
That is a deal breaker.
all right, let's get going. Any announcements for the group before we get started? Don't think I have any this week. All right, Nick and Sarah, go for it.
All right then. Well, let me share my screen. First time I've done this on a newer computer, so. I'll just circle back here.
Sarah, how have your cows enjoyed this winter?
Oh, they're okay. It just gets muddy when it starts thawing up. So, and we did get more snow than maybe you all have. So anyways, they're hanging in there.
What is your wintering strategy?
Well, we have a confinement dairy, so we, we're pretty set with buildings and and stored feed. So,
How about alfalfa winter kill? You hear anything around that area? Or do you have enough snow?
yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I know the couple alfalfa fields that I've been walking around in on some of my weekend walks look okay, but I guess it's hard to say. Yeah, I haven't seen any so far.
All right, let's dive in.
Oh, sorry.
So, our presentation today is by Sarah, Lloyd, and myself. And we're going to be talking for the most part about stuff that's going on in a project called Grassland 2.0, which is one of the USDA's so-called SASCAP projects. So it's a sibling to the currency cap and to the I Prefer project. And Sarah and I are collaborating on the supply chain development side of that, which has been about trying to find market demand for expanding grassland agriculture. And just to briefly say what Grassland 2.0 is all about, the point of it is to try to scale grassland agriculture as a conservation and regenerative agriculture solution in the upper Midwest. Obviously, the trend has been for the loss of a lot of grassland agriculture. And so USA funded a concerted and strategic effort, now in its 5th year, to do that. And we've been in the trenches ever since. And so what we're going to do to tag team this is that I'm going to provide some context and framing for our efforts. Hi, Kevin. And then Sarah will be talking about a particular pathway for scaling up grassland agriculture, namely custom heifer grazing by well-managed grazing, as opposed to other methods of raising replacement heifers for confinement dairy. And she'll dive into the specifics of that. But before that, allow me to frame this a little bit. So one of the great concerns, essentially the motivator of the whole Forever Green project, is how can we scale up continuous living cover agriculture in the Midwest? That is what it's all about. And there's a major trend in the food systems of the world, I think it's fair to say, which is the idea that protein nutrition in the human food system should be more sustainable. So there's a lot of controversy about exactly how much of the carbon footprint or climate impact of food systems comes from protein, but it's certainly a large fraction of it. So the question of how we can make protein more sustainable is of worldwide interest, and it's clearly an opportunity for scaling up CLC agriculture. So the horizons of sustainable protein, more or less, are plant-based diets, not involving eating very much meat. And the other major option is making animal agriculture itself more regenerative. And chugging away in the underbrush for several years now has been a venture that is collaborative between Forever Green and the Plant Protein Innovation Center and the GEMS Agroinformatics project that we have been calling the Sustainable Protein Scaling Initiative. And the basic point is to find ways that the crops that are being developed by Forever Green can become connected to this general quest for more sustainable protein. And as we have sort of made our way along in the ground game of all of that, one of the things that has become clear is that there's I think an attractive opportunity to try to really work at connecting CLC crops, the ones developed by Forever Green and otherwise, to making our current animal agriculture more regenerative. And the reason that we think this is an attractive sort of pathway is that plant-based diets are making some degree of headway, but I think you all are aware that companies like Beyond Beef or Impossible Foods have hit some real market plateaus in recent years, and it's not clear. That's obviously a long-range project, and furthermore, the forecasts are that despite all of the concern about meat consumption, the forecast is that in fact the world will want to eat more meat over the next few decades. So it seems unwise to neglect current animal agriculture as we think about this question of how we can link the sustainable protein movement to scaling up the crops that we're concerned with here. And of course, the continuous living covered crop portfolio that Forever Green is producing has many crops that are relevant to producing new sources of protein, and many crops that could actually be eaten by animals in our current agriculture. So let's talk a little bit about innovation and scaling for regenerative animal agriculture. First of all, the concept of regenerative animal agriculture, if you Google, or I suppose I could have asked ChatGPT, but it's pretty clear that at this point, what people mean by regenerative animal agriculture is mainly grass-fed meat and dairy. So the idea that we could work with our predominant animal agriculture, which is obviously involving various forms of confinement, raising animals, to make it more regenerative, is that idea is still in relatively early days. But I want to just share with you a few interesting possibilities that are sort of gaining momentum. Matt.
Just a quick question, because I am curious, I see methane in the CAFO. How much methane is in the plant grazing?
Yes, well, right. It's not so clear that plant grazing is, massively better in terms of some of the greenhouse gases. That's true. So this is somewhat propagandistic. I didn't mean to endorse it.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Just
I mean,
to illustrate the current discourse.
I mean, I'm sure it's better, but I would love to see by how much, I
Right.
guess, at some point, but yeah.
Well, I think part of it is that, for example, the grass-fed cows mature more slowly. So their cumulative farting
Yeah.
is more.
It's the burping.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
The burping. There was a major kerfuffle a couple of years ago when Burger King did an ad and they claimed that they was jokingly talking about cow farts. And the whole animal, science field was like, it's not the farts, it's the burps. So
The birds,
Thank you.
okay.
Yeah.
Not
Thank
know that either, yeah, so, but yeah, that would be,
Not all.
it's not all, it's mostly the burps. And then what happens with
All right. So an obvious thing to do is to feed animals in our current animal agriculture crops that are more regenerative. This is a report that great person Jennifer Schmidt, who's on the staff at our INE here at UM, did a few years back. We are going to be talking about a very interesting way to get grazing into confinement dairy. In other words, our conventional dairy, which, as I mentioned, is to raise the replacement heifers on grass. Sarah will be talking a lot more about that. The idea that we can source animal feed from perennial grasses, which have enormous regeneration value, is, I think, an extremely important horizon, which has already been commercialized to some degree, as you can see from the little news item there. And more integrative concepts, in which we're not merely talking about what we feed the animals, but are thinking more holistically, are illustrated by this figure, which is from a paper by Lisa Schulte at Iowa State University, a bunch of other folks, And the thing I want to highlight is, Lisa and colleagues are talking about sourcing feeds from regenerative crops, continuous living cover crop crops, yes, but also thinking about sort of circular economy concepts, in other words, anaerobic digestion of the manure, extracting nutrients from that, getting them back onto the fields, bioenergy production, et cetera. So there's some interesting integrative concepts that I think are really very intriguing for us. And another one of these is something that is sort of humorously called biogas done right. This is the brainchild, especially of this fabulous person named Bruce Dale, who's an agricultural engineer at Michigan State University now, emeritus, who the reason I'm mentioning this is that a big part of the whole idea is to be monetizing biomass crops like the double crop that's illustrated there, by using them as feedstocks for anaerobic digestion to supplement the manure. And this is a very interesting way to monetize cover crops. A further example of a pathway for making animal agriculture more regenerative, that's more than just what we feed the cows, is the idea of a manure shed. So this is the interesting idea that rather than, just sort of depositing manure from our current animal agriculture, wherever it sort of seems most convenient at the time, to try to actually rationalize that. And as it says there, apply manure nutrients in a way that meets economic production or environmental production and economic goals. And so people are experimenting with manure sheds, and this is just an interesting little picture of that. You can see, and so this is a part of New Mexico, right by the border of Texas, and you can see there's a big concentration of dairies in a cropped area. And previously, what everybody did was just apply a whole lot of manure within the dotted line that surrounds all those dairies. And recently, these folks have agreed to distribute their manure over a much larger area. And so that solves some problems. It's very socially complex, and is kind of pointing towards where Sarah and I are going in this talk. A manure shed actually is a very exciting, I think, idea about reducing the environmental footprint of our current animal agriculture and using that manure to, for example, grow more cover crops and produce more biogas, things like that. But it's obviously socially complex. There are strong feelings about some of these innovations in animal agriculture. So this is an article from the Star Tribune recently that reported an event, namely a quite contentious meeting of the Public Utilities Commission to discuss a possible pipeline to transport biogas from a very large dairy in near Benson, Minnesota, west central Minnesota, that's operated by a firm that perhaps you've heard of called Riverview, which is a company that operates some very large dairy operations, and points out to us that if we are going to be trying to scale up regenerative animal agriculture, we're going to have to be thoughtful about the impacts of that. And just to point out that our current animal agriculture is quite controversial, and there's a lot of potential for gridlock if we are not careful to be inclusive in how we think about this whole idea of regenerative large-scale agriculture. And it suggests that as we work in Forever Green to scale up these crops, we should think about approaches to the sort of overall way we do our business. Arguably, Forever Green is very much a sustainability science outfit, And we need to think about how we go about our business in a way that is appropriately deals with the strong feelings that folks have about our current animal agriculture. If what happened to, I guess that comes a little later. Okay, so just to say a little bit more about still other things that this whole effort could be connected to. So there's an important project here in Minnesota that I don't know how many of you have heard of, called EMBL, which is a collaboration of the University of Minnesota and a lot of major food and agriculture firms. They're significantly based in Minnesota. And one of the relatively small number of projects of EMBL is this effort to scale up sustainable protein. And you can see the ambition there to become a sort of globally leading hub for innovation in protein sustainability. So this is an important collaborative opportunity, especially around scaling and commercializing more sustainable proteins, which I think Forever Green has some very unique expertise in. And we'll be getting into what that actually looks like on the ground presently in our talk. Another project that deserves to be on the radar screen is something called FARM, which is a project of CFAM's which is very focused on the future of animal agriculture in Minnesota. And this project involves developing a large new facility in Mower County, South Central Minnesota. And it's about a concept of advancing, quote unquote, One Health. In other words, a sort of multifaceted notion of health. And the reason that farm is important to us in Forever Green is that CLC agriculture is clearly crucial to this notion of One Health. And so we are working to connect with the folks, chiefly the CFAM team, who are advancing this farm project to try to make sure that CLC agriculture is sort of recognized as being as important as it is to the future of animal agriculture here in Minnesota. So these are all some of the sort of things we're trying to connect to as we go forward here. So let's talk a little bit more about this idea of innovation and scaling. And just, briefly review a few things that seem critical to scaling CLC crops and scaling a more, as part of a more regenerative animal agriculture. First of all, just to mention, I've said this before in this forum, that the whole idea of scaling of innovations is something that has tended to be black boxed by agricultural researchers. We tend to feel that our responsibility ends at, possibly box 4 or 5 of the sequence that leads up to impact at scale. And one of the, to me, the most appealing things about the Forever Green project is that we are taking the scaling part very seriously and have invested heavily in that. So scaling itself is a serious problem that deserves its research and academic attention. Is actually a relatively new thing, so people can, Mark Shoot, who's a friend of Forever Green, this Dutch guy, as recently 2020 was publishing articles, sort of proclaiming there's a science of scaling. Guess what, folks? We have to take this seriously. We have to study it. We have to do scholarship on it. So 3 critical things to bear in mind, all of which Sarah will be talking about, is first of all, the idea that the things that actually scale out there in the world are not technical innovations, like say new crops. They are technical innovations that are linked to, bundled with, connected to other kinds of innovations, like say innovations in policy or innovations in financing, or social innovations, ways that people cooperate with each other. So a good example of what is needed to scale something like a new grain crop, like Kernza, is it's not just the crop. It's not merely a matter of innovating the crop, as in genetic innovation over there on the right side. But in fact, you have to think about, of course, the whole supply chain by which the crop gets to market. And in many cases, there's a need for innovation all along that supply chain. So that's what I mean when I say what scales is bundles of co-innovations, not just one innovation. And, you know, of course, we recognize this fundamentally for everything. A second is this idea that it's crucial to be responsible about these innovations and to consider the winners and the losers and the unintended consequences. And this then leads us towards this ideal, which in various ways we're trying to implement from Forever Green, that is often called responsible innovation and scaling. Arguably, this is ethically the right thing to do. It's pragmatically also important. I'll talk about that in just a second. And then the third notion of scaling that I wanted to just highlight here, and then again, Sarah will be talking about how we're trying to live up to this, is the idea that this co-innovation process is trying to build bundles of innovations that are the actual thing that scales, is necessarily linked to an integral with efforts to scale. In other words, you have to pull the co-innovations together into a bundle and try it and see how it works. And undoubtedly it won't work very well. And you then go back and figure out what else you have to co-innovate, or how do you have to improve what you've done so far. So in other words, it's certainly arguable that the current prevailing model of innovation and scaling is that they're separate things. Whereas I think the paradigm of Forever Green is that, and you know, the sort of state-of-the-art understanding of this is that innovation and scaling are in fact one, they are a process in which the innovation part and the scaling part are linked together in an iterative way. So, all right, so let's talk about actually some of the key things that we think Sarah and I and others who are trying to pull this particular frontier of effort in Forever Green together are crucial for innovation and scaling for this idea of regenerative animal agriculture. One of these is that regenerative animal agriculture has to be integrated with what is coming to be known as rural placemaking. And this is an idea that is gaining traction among circles where people are trying to think about what it takes to actually achieve scale things like continuous living recovery. So what is rural placemaking? It's a process in which the people of a place choose and then pursue a desirable future for the place that they live. And so a screenshot that shows how one of our peer institutions has a sort of a program in rural placemaking. And why is this important? This is a photograph from this Riverview Farms that I mentioned, that gives you a feeling for the scale of their animal agriculture operations. And, you know, this is the very company that has that operation in, was it Murdoch, Minnesota, where they're trying to generate biogas and running into some, not in my backyard, kinds of feelings about that. But also objections to the basic thing that was highlighted in that Star Tribune article was that folks are concerned that these mega dairies are chasing all other dairy farming in the region out of business and are generally changing the whole character of the region quite a bit. And so it's not merely not in my backyard in a sort of simple sense. And so if rural placemaking is not addressed then, you know, there's an ethical reason to do that, but there's a very pragmatic reason to do that as well. This is a Minnesota Public Radio story from about a year ago about how a 20,000 cow dairy that Riverview Farms was hoping to establish in the general vicinity of the White Earth Reservation was stopped by opposition from the White Earth Nation. So, all right, so that's the first proposition that you're going to hear about from Sarah when I finally shut up. That's the second proposition is that this idea of co-innovation is really critical. And so, again, the idea is that if we're trying to scale up some innovation around regenerative animal agriculture, it certainly will require some degree of co-innovation, not just the innovation itself. And so we're going to be talking about scaling, raising replacement heifers for large conventional confinement dairies by grazing. So that's the sort of innovation. It's, you know, it's not entirely an innovation, but it's not used very much. And so the proposition that I'm saying here is that in order to scale raising replacement heifers by well-managed grazing, we almost certainly will be co-innovation as well. So the bottom line is that there's some principles of scaling from the contemporary understanding of how innovation and scaling are linked together that are almost certainly relevant to this idea of scaling up CLC agriculture by linking it to trying to scale more regenerative animal agriculture. But we don't certainly know exactly how to do that. So we need to pilot and experiment. And that's what Sarah is going to tell you about. So Sarah, that's it in a very large nutshell. So on to you.
Okay, well, I
I'll stop
will, yeah, if you stop sharing, then I'll share. Okay, so great. So I'm just gonna tell you kind of a case study of this collaborative or co-creative process that's coming out of the Grassland 2.0 project, or is sort of fundamental to the way of working of the Grassland 2.0 project and its theory of change. And so a main, let's see, I should probably go into slideshow mode. Sorry about that. I think I've learned how to do this. Okay, does that, people can see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So Grassland 2.0 is working in communities at the watershed level, and sometimes that involves looking at screens, and sometimes that involves sitting in the grass and being out on people's farms. And so the Grassland 2.0 project is a place-based project about engaging discussion and co-learning towards agroecological transformation in places or in entities called learning hubs. And so you can see there are 3 main learning hubs in Wisconsin and 1 in Minnesota. The Illinois one was an early one that didn't quite get off the ground, but that's kind of a lesson in how these things do or don't come together. And I'm going to be telling you today about the Clover Belt Learning Hub and the dairy heifer grazing. And Grassland 2.0 has the theory of collaborative landscape design that involves connecting people, envisioning novel landscapes, designing supply chains, planning enterprises, and incentivizing and supporting change, which would be with both policy and financial and technical assistance. These don't all just happen necessarily one after the other. They are an iterative process, but there's been a lot of careful time spent in the connecting people part of the process and this envisioning part, which I'll tell you about in the Clover Belt. So in order to envision the future, and we wanted to make sure there was a shared understanding of the now. So in the Clover Belt, we did a series of 25 semi-structured interviews and had a list of thought and action leaders representing farmers and agencies, businesses, bankers, different people involved in agriculture and the food system. We worked with Amy Sparks. Some of you might recognize her graphics to create a graphic over what people felt was going on right now in agriculture in their community, and then what they could imagine the future to be, both what they thought it should be and what they thought it might be, because those are kind of different things. And we then brought together the community around those initial scoping stories that came out of the interviews and asked people, did we hear this right? Do you think this sounds like what's going on right now? Did we get the future vision correct? And so had these longer community workshops where everyone that was interviewed was invited. There were people that we didn't manage to get an interview with, but we knew were important to engage in the conversation. So, and we're doing this with close collaboration with a farmer-led watershed group in the region called EPIC, the Opine Partnership for Integrated Conservation. Wisconsin has a growing number of farmer-led watershed groups that can apply for small grants from the state that are paid by and managed by the Department of Agriculture. And this is asking or supporting farmers coming and landowners coming together to look at the primarily water quality and in some cases quantity issues in their own watersheds. So we have completed this similar process in the 4 learning hubs, the 3 Wisconsin learning hubs, Clover Belt, Driftless, and Ridge and Valley, and then the Pine River in Minnesota. And so we did the series of interviews working in collaboration with a community partner. And in fact, in the Driftless, Ridge and Valley, Pine River, we also, there was a community nonprofit or agency staff person that did the majority of the interviews in tandem with the university researcher. In the Clover Belt, I did those interviews with a graduate student with some interaction with our local partners. The Clover Belt was the first one out of the gate, so we were sort of feeling our way into the method. And then from the story of now and the story of the future, we then have been started to talk about these pathways. So this is just a summary slide. I'm going to be talking to you about the Clover Belt, but just to let you know that part of the Grassland 2.0 work is building this process method that is a template to hopefully, work in other places. Okay, so again, after we worked through these community conversations of what's going on now, what we could envision the future to be, we then got together the core group and some conversations with people that had been engaged in the conversation and said, okay, so of all the different things that we think that we might want to do to try to get to that future that we'd envisioned, what should we do? What's some action? And so in the case of the Clover Belt in Marathon County, so north central Wisconsin, they said, we got a lot of dairy farms, we got a lot of dairy cows. What if we got all the heifers or some big proportion of the replacement heifers onto managed pastures. That you could do a lot of work on water quality. It's a low hanging fruit. So we then said, okay, so let's lean into dairy heifer grazing. I just want to give you kind of a primer on dairy heifer grazing if you're not super familiar. The one thing that's important to point out, we get a lot of questions about this out in, talking in community, is when we talking about grazing heifers, we're not talking about like sending your animals to the back 40 in the spring and seeing what they look like in the fall when they wander back to the farm. And I think pasture has a bit of a bad rap in some areas because people have not been managing their pastures very well, and they've been basically continuously grazing. And so they're not getting a lot of good forage quality, and you're seeing a lot of the erosion issues, and you're not getting very good animal performance. So just to be clear, we're talking about management intensive rotational grazing. People are moving their animals once a day, maybe once every other day, but you're really managing the grass for the forage quality, for getting good animal performance. Okay, so just one thing is that like using managed grazing, you can create very high yield forages and at a very low cost. So it's possible in these systems in the upper Midwest. We have an example of Vernon County, Wisconsin, 4.2 tons of dry matter per acre on a Pepin silt loam. The other thing is that, with that low cost of producing the forage, using Finbin, so University of Minnesota's database, our collaborator Jim Munch, that does a lot of kind of business enterprise calculations for the project, he estimates that you can raise a heifer with 180-day grazing season on 1 acre, and it would cost you about 99 cents per head per day. That compares to a confinement system. This is where you'd be taking a stored total mixed ration, bringing it to the animals in confinement, and that ranges on the size, but about $2.50 per head per day. So considerable savings. And then if you were going to be a custom enterprise and you could charge what we're finding is the going rate, about $2.50 per head per day, or even $3 per head per day, you could actually that could be a profit center for your enterprise. So that's, there's a good economic value proposition. The other proposition that really gets farmers' attention is the research results to some side-by-side trials of managed heifers that are raised in managed grazing systems versus confinement. You're seeing significant milk yield increases in the first lactation, and that goes hand in hand with the animal's ability to increase their dry matter intake. So their rumens are better developed. And then anecdotally, people talk a lot about just the foot and leg health, lack of lameness. They are replicating these trials at University Wisconsin Marshfield Egg Research Station. There's a lot of interest in this research. So the animal performance is superior in these early studies. And then, Grassland 2.0 has been trying to get in the conversation of folks looking at no-tills and cover crops, and really saying that if we want to move the needle to the extent that it needs to be moved on soil carbon, on erosion, phosphorus runoff, grassland bird habitat, pollinator habitat, managed grazing is the gold standard. You can get some benefits and some improvements in no-till and cover crop, but it really comparatively doesn't even match up. So these are all the reasons why figuring out ways to get more managed grazing on the landscape is a great idea. So with our community partners who identified this low-hanging fruit, and for all the reasons that I just went over, we then started thinking, okay, well, what would it actually take to get these transformations to take place? And so we started engaging some of the decision support tools that the Grassland 2.0 project has developed. One of those is called the Heifer Grazing Compass. This is an enterprise level Excel-based decision support tool. You can put in your own numbers, you put in your own soil types, you can try to understand what the carrying capacity of your pastures are, and then look at the operating costs and what it would mean for your operation. And then we also have two tools in the project, one called Grayscape, one called Smartscape. Grayscape allows you to go to the field level and you can demarcate off individual fields and look at what would happen ecologically if you transition those. It also will measure how much perimeter fencing and water line feet you would need to transition. And Smartscape then takes it up to the watershed level and allows communities to come together, people to come together and look at, well, what if we shifted all the corn and soybean acres over 7% slope? And what would happen if we did that? So this is what we've been doing in the communities, and I'll tell you a little bit about this kind of scenario development. So these tools have been developed by the project as part of the work, and now we're deploying them in these co-creative conversations with our community collaborators. So for example, in Smartscape, this is in the Clover Belt, the county planning and zoning, or conservation planning and zoning department. They have identified Fenwood Creek, which is this watershed here that's kind of shaded, as one of their priority watersheds. It's a dairy heavy watershed. It's seen as one of the major sources of a lot of phosphorus runoff that's causing issues in the larger watershed, and especially down into a recreational fishing area down the Big Oplen. And so the county and the local partner said, let's look at Fenwood. What if we prioritize Fenwood Creek watershed? So, we got together in some different groups and we used the tools to run these scenarios. And so basically, using Smartscape and aggregating some Grayscape farm level examples, we came up with that, with 7,030 acres converted, you could reduce the phosphorus and reduce the soil loss to an extent that you could meet the local targets that the county had set for that watershed. So that was exciting for people. And so then we kind of took it to the next step and we said, okay, well, if heifer grazing is what's going to go on, then who's going to be working in those 7,000 acres? And so we started thinking about the size of dairy farms. A lot of dairy farms are going out of milking. It's just not profitable at all right now. You're just hemorrhaging money. And so there's an idea that there may be people that they have land, they may have some infrastructure, they have animal husbandry background, and they're transitioning out of milking cows, but would they be custom heifer grazers for other farms? In Wisconsin, we know that many, especially the larger farms, are sending their dairy heifers out to Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, even Idaho. They truck them out there at like 400 pounds, and then they raise them up and they're on feedlots in the Great Plains and the West, and then they're trucked back to the Wisconsin farms a couple weeks before they're going to calve. So this is another reason to say, well, why can't we do that in Wisconsin and take advantage of the transformational potential to more managed grazing acres? So we are envisioning a group of 27 custom heifer grazers, 7 farms that shift from confinement heifers to raising their own heifers on managed grazing, and then we would need 27 farms would be 23 farms that are dairy farmers that are transitioning to custom heifer grazing. We imagine 4 cash grain operators transitioning, and then we need to engage 27 sending farms or the clients of these custom farms. So then we are working together to understand what the potential profit and savings, profit if you're operating as a custom enterprise, savings if you're kind of in-housing this. And so we've been using the Compass tool as well as just some of the basic FinBin averages for costs. Just to point out, we know that there is winter, maybe some years there's winter in Wisconsin. We can't graze 365 days a year. So we also have doing the calculations. You estimate that you'd need 2 acres of land for 1 heifer for a year round. And that winter bale feeding is a very legitimate and a good way to feed heifers in the winter, so you would harvest some of the forage during the spring flush or in other times of the year, and then store that and then feed that in the winter, and that works as a system quite well. And then the next step is to work with folks to understand the transition costs, to establish the pasture, seed, fertility, fence, water systems. Also, what would be the cost of perhaps some small tractors or ATVs or different equipment that you might want to have. So we've been estimating that out for these different enterprises in our scenario. And then also looking at the policies of EQIP, the NRCS EQIP programs that do cost share, often 70% cost share. So what would be these costs? What we find is that with the savings or the profit that we estimate at the enterprise level, that you could pay back these transition costs, sometimes in as little as 2 to 3 years, certainly with under 5 years. So this looks like a really good investment for folks. And then, so now comes the social part. So how do we come together as a community to support people as they learn new skills, they take some risks, but because of the economic profitability potential, it looks like at least that part is a good move. So we are building a community of practice of dairy heifer grazers in the county and in the region. We are working with the banks to understand the kind of risk management or operating loans that they might be able to provide to bridge the gap of the EQIP funding or other incentive payments that might be made. We're building a contract library for the relationships between the sending farms and the custom operators. This heifer performance outcome is really interesting to people. It's something that people understand, that they've seen, but the fact that we're now getting some research to verify it. So we are kind of collating some of the conversations between some of the different researchers and also looking, there's some on-farm data that we'd like to bring in to perhaps sort of triangulate what they're seeing in their research trials at this research station. And then importantly, thinking about the story and the important ecosystem service outcomes that can come from this shift to more pasture and more continuous living cover, and how that fits in the milk shed and the supply chain partners. So we are currently working with a consulting firm that is really knowledgeable in like carbon measurement, reporting and verification, and working on a pilot protocol. So if dairy is moving to entirely grass-based managed grazing heifers? How does that work its way up through the supply chain into the milk pool and the ingredients for any of the claims that the supply chain partners are wanting to make or meeting their ecological goals? So that's another active part of the work that we're doing right now in scaling up heifers. And I think that's all I got. So that's what we're up to.
Pretty cool. Thank you, Sarah and Nick. Questions, thoughts from the groups?
Well, I wanted to say just one connection to make, and that is that the rural placemaking that I talked about is the part that Sarah talked about first, in which we, in all of these areas that we're working, there is some degree of collective unhappiness about water, basically. So in the Clover Belt region, for example, there's been a big loss of grassland. And the big dairies have been using corn silage and things like that as their predominant feed. And there's a whole chain of impoundment lakes of the Oakland River that have completely crashed in terms of their water quality, harmful algal blooms and things like that. And that has created a shared sense of we really got to do something. And this EPIC group that Sarah mentioned, it is a farmer-led watershed group, but it is unusual for the degree of cooperation between conservation groups, environmental groups, and production agriculture. So that's what we mean by rural placement. There's a community level conversation about what are we going to do about the water. We've got to do something about the water. And so let's face it, the large scale dairy in the region, because of their use of corn silage, is very complicit in the water. So there's a certain motivation to do something. And this is where the heifer grazing seems to really create an opportunity. So I just wanted to comment on a few connections between the sort of more, the concepts I was talking about and how we are piloting that there. And the final thing I'll say is that we are trying to bring together finance innovations as well as, to support the scaling up of this heifer grazing and support folks getting into that. And also, we're trying to set up a system in which there's some sort of master heifer grazer folks that are willing and able to share what they know, as we try to develop this cluster. So what Sarah was describing, we think of it as a place-based scaling project for, trying to deal with the regional concerns about the water, trying to deal with a certain opportunity, namely all these folks with animal skills going out of business, as in dairy, who, could go into business raising heifers. And so there's an opportunity, but it's like a place-based opportunity. So how do we work with those opportunities there in a place-based way to try to scale up this particular innovation in generative animal agriculture? So I just wanted to say a few things to try to link the two parts of our presentation.
I have one kind of nuts and bolts type question. Since it seems like the farms in Wisconsin that are staying in the milking business are probably larger, I was wondering, what made the calculus of like one sending farm to one accepting farm? Like, could it be different than that ratio?
Sarah can speak to the math there, I think.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of like these logistics that we are doing community workshops and this community practice on, because there's some, it's possible we meet heifer grazers that raise heifers for multiple farms. We also meet farms that send their heifers to multiple heifer raisers. But there certainly is, people want their animals kind of in groups, so that's part of us figuring out, okay, so if it's 1,000 cow dairy, it's going to have about this many heifers that it needs, and you can probably group them in these age cohorts. And then with dairy, there's also we just had a meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago and gotten a long conversation with some nutritionists and farmers about, well, it's probably easier to graze bred heifers, and then you also don't have to worry about the infrastructure of trying to get them in to get them bred, because people are primarily using artificial insemination. So there's some conversations with people about, oh, but how are you going to get the animals back in to get them bred? So then some people are like, well, I'm just going to graze my bred heifers. So there's certainly this kind of the logistics of like what age cohorts and then are you willing to send your animals to multiple grazers, or do you want the kind of consistency? And a lot of the larger farms talk about how, like the people they send their animals to in Kansas, like they have said they traveled to Kansas multiple times. They did a lot of homework and research about understanding what conditions the animals would be raised under. So it's an important decision for farmers. So that's kind of how we want to be in conversation, so people can get in relationship with each other and get good working memorandums of understanding and expectations, and then just, figure out how to take the plunge together if it's new for them.
Similar question about kind of logistics and timing. So I imagine that most large dairy farms want to have cows freshening on a regular basis, always having cows coming into milking. And so they would also always have heifers going out, at all the different stages. So you wouldn't really be able to just do the 180 days of each batch. Like some would start in the winter and finish in the spring, on and on. So do the economics hold up when you're talking about bale grazing or bale feeding? Because there's a lot more invested into making dry hay than just managing the pasture as is. So I'm just wondering if you've looked at that as well.
Yeah, I think we could use taking a little bit finer tooth comb on the differential or the difference in the economics of the bale grazing versus the 180 days. But yeah, so we don't have the fine level of how much it costs. The other thing is, there's a number of people that like they will bring their animals back into a confinement system in the winter. And I mean, on one level, the fact that you have a lot of people that have building infrastructure, like buildings and heifer sheds, this actually could be another opportunity, even though if you look at the sort of wear and tear on a building, because a lot of people say, well, I already have these buildings for my heifers, why would I then send them out into the pasture to have my building stand empty for even during the regular grazing season? And because it's sort of like this mindset, well, I paid for this building, I better use it. Even though some people say no, but then you're going to have less wear and tear on your buildings if you're not using them for 180 days of the year. And so some of that is even just, we found like people getting in conversation with each other and talking themselves out of the kind of mindset that it's a waste of their building if they started grazing. So I think that's all kind of in the mix, because this is really it's like a cultural shift of the standard practice of raising heifers. My husband and his brother both did 4-year dairy science degrees at UW-Madison. They are really good at confinement TMR production. Like that is what they were taught at the university. So it is definitely like a reorganization of what people have learned.
Yeah, fascinating.
I'm curious if there's any interest in adding like a silvopasture tree element to the grazing land.
I think that would be great to figure out, and I actually just got a text while we were sitting here from someone who works with brands and said, can we talk next week about silvopasture and grazing? So, I think that space is open. We have not woven the silvopasture part into, our plans right now, but we're definitely, I think people are open to these things. And there's a bunch of different grazing conferences. You know, in Wisconsin, we're gonna do a session at an upcoming regional grazing conference that usually draws a couple hundred people. The Grassworks conference was just back in the beginning of February. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to get in there to talk to farmers about kind of layering in these perennialities into their systems.
Yeah, I know very little about it, but I know that I've seen some research about the value of various edible tree species like willows and mulberries and things like that. It can be pretty cheap to establish per plant. I know mulberry leaves are up there with alfalfa quality, so. It doesn't have to just be a shady thing, that's how we it.
Yeah, and
That
I
might
don't
be
know
a-
much about that. Yeah.
I feel like the concern thing of like, oh, I'm taking away grass for this tree, but the trees can be edible too.
Yeah, interesting.
Like the shading, actually, there's research on there, actually shading.
Yeah.
So Jeff Berg, 4-year dairy science degree from UW River Falls. Well, it used to be, but the space more than now, but, I guess a comment first in that kind of a question, so kind of, this is disoriented for me, and Sarah can appreciate this too, so I was at and this is anecdotal, but I was at a river basin conference last month, and includes folks from Manitoba, and this was independent conversations from, co-op and then farmers, like, oh yeah, we're shipping straw and alfalfa hay down to Minnesota and Wisconsin, so it's like, how did we get into that system? Like, that just, I'm so disoriented, that, we're in a, Wisconsin dairy farm that grows beautiful alfalfa. Yes, it rains and sometimes you have ruin, but how did we get in that system? So I heard again yesterday in southern Minnesota, it's like, we buy our hay from Iowa, or our straw, our straw, but still, so it's like, and they like to get their straw from Canada. So it's like, that's a big system that we're have to address. But then I think about opportunities. So, one of the principles of soil health is putting livestock on the landscape. And so we talk about kind of foraging for evergreen, Gernza, but I mean, we talk about, cover crops, grazing of cover crops in the shoulder season, fall seeded cover crops. So, that to me seems to be opportunity. We have a system, I'm not sure how good it is because we only have 1% more working at it in this statement, so that I think the feds do is the grazing exchange where there's online forums to match cows to forage land, grazing land. But I mean, do we think enough about it? Even with forever green, about what is the grazing and forage quality of forever green crops? Small grains, I think some of that, but would you breed differently? If it's actually for the forage quality than green quality?
I think we struggle with that on Kernza, just finding the right match between grain growers and where the livestock is. It's easiest if they're on the same farm and the same person's managing them both, but that's less and less common. So then you have to have a neighbor relationship or go through an exchange. And my impression is that, I don't know the level of activity, but it's not like those exchanges have 100x the amount of, residue grazing or cover crop grazing that's going on, as far as I can tell. I will say that the most cover crops I see driving around this region is when I go from my wife's family's hometown in Wisconsin to my parents' farm in the Driftless, and there's a lot of dairies, and it's all cereal rye. That I'm sure is there because it's corn silage, cereal rye, graze the cereal rye, go back to corn silage. So there is an economic driver around it, and forage quality is high. So it's kind of already there, but then I think you get into the sorts of questions that Nick is addressing of how do you diffuse the adoption of that innovation? What are the drivers to do that? You can put numbers together that show there's profitability there, but that's not really sufficient. that gets me to a question I had, which is the grayscape tool. Seems like, very practical and useful. I almost think you could start a company going out and doing consults with farmers. And maybe it's a nonprofit company, keeps the costs low or whatever, or you license it to NRCS or to the Wallace Center or someone, like I'm wondering if there's a future for that tool because it's a farm by farm retail level change making tool, right? So if it ends with this project, it's cool, but it doesn't achieve it, it doesn't drive the change we're looking for. If there's an engine behind it to get it in front of farmers, it could be different. Maybe it's too soon to say, but I'm curious.
Well, I feel, Jeff, in response to what I'm hearing and what you were saying, I think that Forever Green in general, has not oriented itself to grazing that much, and the animal agriculture all that much. And partly we're trying to do that with this sustainable protein work, but I do think, and Steve Morris, partnership says this all the time. Why don't you guys at Forever Green do more by grazing? Be it grass, be it grazing covers. It is, I think it is a significant opportunity that, we just haven't really built much of a program in.
Maybe the hybrid rye could be inhabited with that.
Can you graze it and get the grain yield also?
Does anybody know? I don't know.
They do in Kansas, they do for winter wheat all the time, but I don't know if it's been tried.
Is that right? They graze the wheat and then get a decent yield.
Backgrounding on wheat top growth is a very common part of the process of taking weaned calves for the feedlot. We wean the calves with background in Kansas, Nebraska, which is mostly winter wheat, vegetative growth in the winter, fall, winter, and then they move on to a feedlot. And they, I think they see a grain yield reduction, but not too substantial, so that the system as a whole is more profitable.
But that's part of my question, because is that really the value proposition is now with the forage for forage? What's the value of soil health? And you can, rent the land out for grazing in the winter. So it's like, it is now, yeah, the dual use and the green, but.
Right.
Yeah, soil health, and what's the outside driver? What's the co-innovation?
Yeah, and just a comment on the grayscape or these decision support tools. I mean, I think, I'm a rural sociologist and have been more, working out in the field on cooperative development and sort of enterprise things. And so coming back into the university and working with the folks that are creating these programs and the development and the coding and all that is, the risk with a lot of them is if the program isn't set up to like use them in an entrepreneurial way, they're just gonna end up collecting dust. Because like right now they're not, like they are open and people can click in and they're relatively user friendly. I mean, if I can figure out how to do them, then anybody can figure out how to do them. But like one of the things that Grassland 2.0 has been doing is what's called the Grassland Academy. So they've been training the trainers. So they've been working with NRCS county level staff and county land water conservation staff to train them to use the different tools, as well as train them just how to write grazing plans that are in accordance with the NRCS standards. And so I think, in any of these kind of decision support tool or apps or things that projects want to develop, like really then thinking, well, if we develop it, then who's there to use it and in an entrepreneurial way? Because I do see that as a bit of a weakness sometime in these university developed things, that they don't really get out there in action.
for the hybrid rye, I guess that would be trying to loop Joachim Wiersma. Cause I think he's the only one who kind of works with that, right, Kevin? Do you know about this? Yeah.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, it's a fabulous crop, for sure.
To your point, Sarah, I wonder if some of the grazing related entrepreneurs out there, like, Arlo Hark is his name. He's got a partner in business and they do a lot of solar grazing. But you know, there are small entrepreneurial companies out there that are trying to innovate in grazing and deploying a tool like that as a consultant for farmers. I mean, there's also just grazing consultants, right? Like if you found a grazing consultant who saw it as a tool in their work to help bring grazers online, you know, another offering in their suite of services, that could be an avenue to get it moved out as well.
So, you know, grass-fed meat and dairy in general is not necessarily limited by grazers. You know, that's an important thing that we've been dealing with this Grassland 2.0 project. So milking infrastructure and animal processing infrastructure are really major barriers. So that's, you know, that's a perspective, and that's the other focus of supply chain work that Sarah and I have been doing is trying to some of those driftless areas that were on Sarah's map to try to gear up for some collective efforts to deal with meat processing bottlenecks, which are severe.
Keep in mind too, with Minnesota and Sarah, I actually don't know, I assume it'd be the same in Wisconsin, but we roughly have the same number of dairy cows we had like 10 years ago. We have much less farms, so there's a kind of regional and size component of this as well. So, you know, same number, and so the market or whatever you believes that's the number. And that's sort of consolidated. So, you know, as we talk about for grain, you got to regionalize some of these things as well.
Yeah. And this US Census numbers just came out, you know, the other day, so everybody's like, seems shocked and surprised again that the consolidation is continuing in an extreme way.
Jeff's earlier point about, you know, how do you value the soil health aspect of it? I'm curious who you're working with as the MMRV consultant, and given how slippery those numbers can be, especially when you're talking about soil carbon, you know, does there seem like a path forward? Because the dairy industry has major sustainability commitments, so you could think that this would all ladder up into those if we can get to numbers that people trust. So yeah, what are you hearing on that?
Yeah, well, and the Grassland 2.0 project, especially, so Randy Jackson, who's a grassland ecologist, who's one of the PIs, along with, you know, Nick as a Claudio Graton and others, you know, they have the 30-year WIXT trial at the University of Wisconsin Arlington Station, which is the Wisconsin Integrated Cropping Systems trial, where they're, you know, using that as a base to try to understand soil carbon in different production systems. And they're quite skeptical about how much we can know about the carbon sequestration of the soil. And I think that has caused us to take a bit of pause, because it is a Wild West, or slippery, as you say. It is quite slippery out there with the brands and all the different claims making. And so that partially, that's, you know, Nick and I have been talking with this one group that works with a lot of the big brands to just kind of understand how they see the landscape and how it relates to like scope 3 emissions claims that different groups are making. So I have been proceeding with caution, which has probably kind of slowed some of that side down. The groups on the ground that we work with are quite interested in the water quality, but yet you know, they know that the market conversation seems to be very much in the carbon conversation, even though the science is extremely unsettled.
Well, yeah, and you know, the basic problem is that the Unilevers of the world, other kinds of firms like that, have to have, you know, peer-reviewed science. They're increasingly feeling they have to have peer-reviewed science for their sustainability plans. And peer-reviewed science is expensive, slow. So this is a scaling barrier, but it can't be ignored.
Yeah, I mean, you got incredible results from Wixt, but go 10 miles down the road and you're gonna see a different result.
Yeah.
You know, that's another huge challenge.
Yes.
I think it is a nice, those results are a nice. I don't know what the right word is, you know, caution against the hype, basically.
Mhm.
Some places it's gonna be even harder than it was in that trial to build carbon, and some places it'll be easier or different, and so. Yeah, it's,
Yeah, I'm here at the Marble Seed or Moses conference, and there was a breakout session yesterday about carbon markets. So I took the opportunity to listen in, and there was a woman based out of Chicago from Yale, and she's is part of one of those carbon smart commodity grants where they're investigating using different rock salt or sorry, rock dust instead of lime in fields to generate better carbon outcome or carbon capture, or I don't even know. I was like, what? So anyway, I was like, can you give me the crash course in soil chemistry? So she did, and she was very helpful. But I mean, it really was interesting. And then the USDA, one of the people running some of the climate smart commodity grants, was here too. And so she kind of chimed in, and there was a lot of skepticism in the room about what was and how farmers will actually fare in this scramble, and how does it actually get monetized? If you can measure it and report it and verify it, how does it actually get monetized? And who gets the monetization?
time will tell.
Hopefully farmers, the future is insetting, so with the money directly in the farmer's pocket instead of kind of these offsets, and the big things and those are, kind of input management, fertilizer management, nitrogen, manure management, and then, kind of a continuous cover. And so Grassland 2.0, forever green, you tick those boxes, so.
Yeah.
So insetting to the future, that's looking out for us.
Yeah. Feel hard to quantify, but we know we're kind of on the side of the angels and going in the right direction, so.
What was I'm not familiar with the Wix study. What was the basic upshot of it?
For 30 years, they've had, I think, maybe, and help me, Sarah, what is it? Continuous corn, soy with tillage, corn, soy with no tillage.
Dairy, they've had a dairy rotation with alfalfa, corn,
Decades of replication.
and then managed grazing, and then perennial prairie.
Right,
Yeah.
and isn't the grazing and the prairie are the only systems that have built carbon or something like that?
Yeah, none of the other ones show that that you would build any carbon, and then the pasture shows that you would at least maintain, and you might build some, but all the other ones lose carbon.
Dramatically better.
How much better was the prairie, Sarah, do you recall?
I can't remember. They just had a new paper out. I can find it and send it to you all because I just saw a presentation the other day. I just don't remember.
Take a road trip there sometime for that, and then.
Yeah.
Printed on there.
Is there?
Who can say they were there last year? Sarah and I.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the only devil's advocate point I would make is like, if you're talking about a practice, you have like prairie's the best, grazing is kind of stable all the way down to like continuous form of tillage. None of the other systems were, none of the annual based systems were building carbon. Well, some of them were less bad.
Yeah.
That you
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if you're crediting a practice, you might not be adding carbon, but you're losing less.
Right.
So there is some way in which that makes sense to the market. There's less carbon going in the atmosphere, even though that system as a whole is still, yeah, so it's like, what's your baseline? Or you can, yeah, I guess perversely, you would be incentivizing a system that's better than the worst, but still pretty bad. So that's still a lot to be figured out. All
yeah.
right, well, thank you, Nick and Sarah. Very fascinating.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for the time and good questions.
Sarah, I wanted to just give you an update from my dad, who you talked with.
Yeah.
Go, and he did find an outlet for
I will get the
Cabs.
He did.
took a long time.
Yeah, no, that's great.
More bucks.
One reason I did that
And
first
the
piece, I
thing
thought-
that unlocked it was emailing the PFI listserv. Yeah.
The which
Yeah.
listserv?
The Practical Farmers of Iowa listserv.
Oh, nice. Excellent.
So that, nothing else, Organic Valley can,
Didn't stick, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
the
the-
Wisconsin grass-fed beef, I tried to get them kind of hooked up and, yeah, but, okay, cool.
but he found, I think that the farmer is part of Organic Valley
Okay,
beef operation, but he had to get down to the farmer level.
uh-huh, to
Be-
make the
That's the
connection,
practice.
yeah, yeah, interesting.
So, thanks, Frank. See ya. Yeah, so anyway, at
Well,
least there's a
that's good.
ending.
That
Yeah.
is a happy ending.
Cool.
Cool, well, I'm gonna go wander the trade show here and see
right.
what's up at Marble Seed.
Sounds good. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.